There are a lot of unspoken rules for army painting. You want to be fast and efficient. You want to be consistent with the rest of your army. You should do some tests before committing to a scheme. Today we're going to toss all of that in the trash to see if we can do without. And hopefully in the process, show you how you can take your scheme for a regular army and crank it up to 11. I recently finished up a unit of 5 incubi in my Desert Dark Eldar scheme, and I really like them. If you had to break down my colors, it would look something like this. I recently picked up some of the new Kill Team Mandrake models to add to my Drakari army, and at first, I painted them to look just like my incubi, and halfway through the process, it just didn't feel right. These interdimensional fiends are more elemental than human, and this paint scheme just feels way too inside the box. I want to come up with a better idea that suits their character more, but still lives inside my scheme, and to do that, we're gonna need to break some rules. The first rule we're breaking is the need for a test scheme. I painted these guys up pretty much start to finish while hanging out at my friend Vince's place. I didn't have all my normal tools and paints, so experimenting didn't really make sense to me. I just picked a scheme and I committed. Speaking of, after a black undercoat, I start the paint job off by base coating the skin and the hair of the Mandrake in pure white. Goodbye, boring paint scheme. I'm using Tamiya flat white here, but any solid white will do. With the white undercoat complete, I base coat the white parts of the model in yellow-orange. Try to avoid hitting the hair with this step if possible. The white undercoat step ensures that we get a really solid yellow color. A great way to shave some time off of this scheme is if you have a nice yellow-orange that's already opaque. Then you would need to do a white undercoat. This step reveals the second way in which we're breaking some rules. This scheme is inefficient. There are definitely some opportunities to speed things up, cut corners to save on time but lose on quality, but I'm just choosing to ignore those decisions. I'm mostly speaking to myself when I say this, but it can be really easy to get stuck in an endless loop of testing, never settling on any one thing, so to avoid that this time, I'm really just gonna go with my gut. With yellow color firmly in place, I'm going to apply a white oil wash to all of the skin. I've been seeing a lot of super glowy miniatures from El Miniaturista online and want to take a stab at the process. The key to a good oil wash is to not thin it too much. You don't want it so thin that gravity pulls all the oil to the bottom of the mini, but you still want that hot capillary action. The second trick is to let the oil wash dry for a long time, somewhere in the window of 10 to 16 hours. Some people might say that's too long, but I've done several oil washes with these products, and it works great for me. I made some progress on 5 more incubi at Vince's and got some of the best oil wash results ever, and I think a lot of it comes down to just waiting a decently long time. With the oil wash mostly cured, it's time to clean up. I dip a makeup sponge in mineral spirits and try to wick most of it off. I don't want it soaking wet. Then I gently rub off the white oil paint on the topmost surfaces, trying my best to move the sponge perpendicular to details. If you run your sponge with the details, you have a much better chance of removing paint that you want to stick around. With the model all cleaned up and looking Tron-like, it's time to apply a light yellow ink to make those white runic cracks look like glowing yellow. At Vince's house, he had a much better yellow ink that I used on the rest of the squad. Okay, I actually found the ink that I used at Vince's house. It's called Lemon Yellow. I am using Brilliant Yellow in this video, and honestly, it's kind of a fail. So if you want to mimic this, you should use Lemon Yellow. Or better yet, you should just use an oil wash that is already the color yellow so you can skip the ink altogether. Currently, I'm using an ink that's basically the same hue as my base coat. And to get a more striking result, you should definitely use something closer to highlighter yellow. I also had the pleasure, or displeasure, of using Vince's airbrush for this step. I'm in the loneliest room in Vince's house, and that is his office. You know, all the boys are out there painting minis and talking about things, and I'm in here just airbrushing. I've decided to perform a smear campaign on Vince, so let's do that. First of all, look at the state of this airbrush area. Oh my gosh. You push this airbrush and it just stays stuck down.
Automatic airbrushing.
That's probably not good either. Ceiling texture looks like the outside of a face hugger egg. TP roll unrolling on the inside. Although I will say the wavy perforation is pretty nice. Now, onto the magical step. I'm gonna dry brush some orange on the skin to further enunciate those bright and glowing recesses. To attempt to get a softer result, I make sure to wipe my brush on a non-absorbent surface, like a Miniac cutting mat available at Miniac.co. I also wet my dry brush the smallest amount. Even then, I still struggle. The issue with paint schemes is that there's an underlying promise that if you follow my steps, use my tools, use my paints, you'll get an outcome similar to this. But that's kind of a lie. Every paint scheme has a learning curve. The better you get at applying it, the faster you get, and maybe even some steps you can skip. I personally am not very good at dry brushing. I get a dusty and inconsistent result. And so as part of my paint plan, I have a corrective step where I am glazing a mixture of orange and yellow over top of my dustiness to try to hide it. If you are better at dry brushing, you could skip this step altogether. In order to avoid struggling yourself, consider checking out my web store, Miniac.co. Over there we have hobby tools like big double-sided 3mm thick self-healing cutting mats with an imperial grid on one side and a metric grid on the other. Or the brush coffin, a fully metal box with a 2-layer foam interior for storing your brushes and other hobby tools that comes in red and black. If tools aren't your jam, you can also find minis on my site. Large 75mm display models of vampires and wood elves, but also 32mm options as well. If you need help painting the larger display models, you can also check out my masterclass courses. Each course is a front-to-back educational experience meant to teach you everything you need to know about how to paint the miniature. It isn't simply a painting walkthrough with extra footage. Each course is prefaced with many lessons on the skills required to paint in the way the instructor does. Speaking of, there are multiple different instructors, myself included, so you can get different perspectives and approaches. A ton of work went into these courses, and I couldn't be happier with them. Lastly, you can check out all the cool merch I have on the site as well, like this t-shirt, with a couple of options at a super low clearance price. Lots of fun things to check out at Miniac.co. Now, let's get back to the mandrakes. With the skin looking glowy, let's base coat the hair and the magical fire in a warm white color. I mean barely warm white, like the color yellow was walking by and crop dusted some white paint. I hope that imagery is clear. With the white poppin', it's time to do some wet blending, but first, let me tell you about how we're breaking our third army painting rule. Remember my scheme from earlier? I tried to take the round peg of a scheme and fit it into the circular hole that is the mandrakes, and it didn't work to my liking. So let's brainstorm a little bit. Obviously, I'm using the yellow color in a big way on their skin, but what other colors could I use for their magical flames? Turquoise is normally a spot color in my army, which means that it's used for small pops of color. But what if I took that and I blew it up? Pun intended. What rule am I even breaking? It's a rule of my own. I never like to use 2 or more saturated colors on my minis in large quantities. Small little pops of colors, totally fine. I find that it often makes the model confusing to look at, and the 2 colors often end up fighting each other aesthetically. I'm gonna try to make a couple of thoughtful considerations to hopefully avoid those problems, however. I get to about 80% of the final result with just one quick wet blend, and with a few more minutes of refinement, I can clean up some of the blends. To make the fire look more like actual fire, I spent some time painting the recesses of the flames with bright white and turquoise paint to give it the impression that the inner core of the fire was more intense, like the skin of the mandrakes. Next, let's work on the hair, which should already be white. What I did while at Vince's was to simply apply a GW contrast paint that matched my magical blue glow. This darkened down the deeply sculpted recesses of the hair a lot, which required 2 rounds of highlighting to transition up to a bright white highlight. To skip one of those steps, I used thinned down contrast paint instead. Because it darkens the white hair less, all I have to do is apply 1 highlight of my max white to the very top of the head. It doesn't look as good as the other 9, but it skips a longer step in my paint scheme. It's up to you whether or not the trade in time and quality is worth it. Next up, let's work on the lower half, which I'll start with a base coat of a very dark brown. I'll also paint the bones, weapons, and other details in the same color. With the base coat complete, I'll add some very minimal scratchy highlights. I get my highlight color by taking some brown and mixing in some orange and some warm white. I picked orange because orange is in my scheme, the skin of the mandrakes, and I wanted to link that element with the brown more. Additionally, brown is already a warm color, and so mixing in orange isn't gonna really ruin it at all. Then, with this highlight color, I base coat the ropes around their waist. To highlight the ropes, I mix a bit more orange and white into this current brown color that I'm using. Then, with that highlight color, I base coat the bones. Finally, I mix even more orange and white into the color to get my bone white highlight. I've done this trick before, but it's a really powerful one. In one single color progression, I can paint 3 different materials: dark brown leather, mid brown rope, and a light brown bone. All of those parts feel harmonious, and I don't have to get out any extra paint. Win-win. On to the weapon, which is dead simple. I paint the handle and the guard in a dark blue metal steel, and use that very same color to add a very scratchy edge highlight, keeping the majority of the blade a very dark brown, which reveals how I am solving the problem of too many bright and beautiful colors. Including versions of that same hue, in this case blue, that are more desaturated helps to include it into the scheme more. I have a dark blue steel, a cold white for the hair, and finally the juicy flame color. For the base, I apply some texture. I used this super rusty orange option because I thought I'd like the color, and I did not, so I repainted the base a bit more of a suitable hue. Then I sprinkled on some of the cool basing mixture I was sent for free from PK Pro. I fixed this stuff down to the base with glue from the same brand. I liked the look of this basing material, and the point of this stuff is to not paint it. But dousing it in glue darkens it down kind of substantially, which is a bit of a gotcha. Also, this glue isn't strong enough for some of the larger rocks. They were falling off afterwards without much effort. After the glue was dry, I slathered on some of that dusty enamel wash, which dries really bright. I intentionally got some of this on their robes as well, for some weathering. Lastly, with a mixture of inks, I airbrushed the ring around the edge of the base to create a nice hot center, but also to get some more of that orange on the model, to again assist the orange elsewhere on the Mini. With a crispy black base rim, we'll get into the 4th and final way I'm breaking traditional army painting rules. My scheme for Dark Eldar features heavy use of black and cream, with those 2 colors covering easily 85% of the model, and they're nowhere to be found on my mandrakes. They're inconsistent with the rest of my army. But are they actually? On paper, I would have shut down the ideas that I employed on these minis, but after giving them a chance, I'm glad that I did. While this scheme isn't the perfect idea and the best execution, I learned a few things. There are ways to include multiple vibrant colors that take up a lot of visual space on the Mini and have it not look out of place. Efficiency isn't the most important thing when you're painting a one-off unit that won't reuse the ideas you're employing. You can have a fairly different paint scheme than the rest of your army, and as long as you're making thoughtful choices, it will still look cohesive. It's important to really challenge your ideas of the world, to really make sure that what you think aligns with your actual experience. Adopting others' opinions helps to avoid challenging critical thinking and painting and really speeds up some stuff. But in an artistic medium like miniature painting, feels a little strange. The beauty of art is how nothing is right or wrong, which leads to diversity, which comes from personal discovery. Don't take that opportunity away from yourself. If you guys enjoyed this video of me adding to my Drakari army, I'll have a playlist linked down in the description below of all the videos so far of me updating that army for you to check out. Don't forget to check out the Miniac.co web store. And if you like the video and the channel, and you want to support my miniature education on the internet, there are many ways to do that. Notably, Patreon is a big way. With Patreon, you get access to my Discord server where you and I can hang out any day of the week and chat about your miniature painting projects, or whether or not Alien Romulus is the best Alien movie. You also get access to my behind-the-scenes posts, so you can see what I am doing week after week. You get to vote on what I paint in a given month, and more. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint